Okay, folks, we'll make a start. It's just gone 7:05. Hopefully there will be a few more people joining us in a minute. I have had a few apologies. Welcome to this evening's online meeting of Plymouth Rotary Club. We've got a few visitors and some friends from Rotary clubs around the world, and also a couple of non-Rotarians joining us as well. So it's great to have you guys with us. Unfortunately, our president, Graham, can't make it tonight, so you've got me in the chair. As I explained just now to a few of you, I'll be sort of multitasking here, sort of chairing the meeting, but also looking to see if we're getting any latecomers joining us. But we are recording the meeting, because I know we've had a few apologies from members who can't make it this evening. If we have time towards the end of the meeting, what we might try and do is we'll try and utilise breakout rooms, so we can perhaps go into breakout rooms, smaller sort of groups, just to have a little chat after the meeting, but we'll see how time goes for that. But in the meantime, I'd just like to welcome our main speaker tonight, someone who I've heard speak a few times before to Rotary clubs, and I think a couple of us here tonight have also heard him talk before. We're in for a fascinating talk tonight, so without further ado, Bob, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan. Thanks everyone for taking the time to come and listen to me. There's quite a few slides to get through. Dan said he wanted me to combine the stuff we did in maritime with the stuff that we do on Dartmoor and on land. And unfortunately, to do that properly would take at least 3 hours. So I've condensed as much as I can into quite a few slides, but hopefully they're mostly 99% pictorial with some videos in. So hopefully you won't glaze over as time goes on. My name is Bob Stone, and quite often get asked, even though I'm based up in Birmingham and live in Droitwich, what the hell are you guys doing down here? Coming down to Plymouth and Dartmoor and Wembley, and you'll understand all this a little bit later on. What are you doing down here? Why isn't the University of Plymouth or Exeter doing this? Well, I'm Plymouth born, bred and proud. I went to Sutton, which of course is now in Regent Street, a block of flats in Plymouth. I remember the good old days of the Westwood TV and Gus Honeybun, and I used to play in Plymouth Silver Band. So I think that's my pedigree at least, and as I say, I'm quite proud of being Plymouthians. There's no real, as you see the kind of things we've been doing, it'll come as no real surprise as to why I and my colleagues and previously my students come down and do a lot of our work down in the area. I'm an Emeritus Professor, which basically is a posh name for a professor who does the work but doesn't get paid for it. I took early retirement in 2009. That was a joke, because the team and I are still doing what we do. And tonight, I'm just going to focus really on one of my passionate areas, which is heritage and use of virtual reality and augmented reality, where we put virtual objects into the real world, and what we're doing with that in and around the Plymouth area. A lot of our work is in defence, and particularly defence healthcare. Again, we've been working with the Royal Marines at Devonport, who have been helping us in simulating casualty evacuation, and that would be for. We're hoping to start phase 3 of that very, very soon. So that might be a subject for another talk in the not too distant future. Healthcare, you'll see during this presentation, because there is a fantastic link between us doing things in various places around the South Coast and Dartmoor, and meeting up with people who tell us stories. And that's the great thing about the heritage side of what we do, is that we meet some fantastic people with some fantastic stories, and who've got relatives who've still got some of the material that we desperately need in shoe boxes or suitcases under their bed, which is like gold dust for us when we come to recreate these things. Virtual heritage, very, very briefly, is, as I say, is using this thing called virtual reality and augmented reality, whether you're using headsets. You can see this. You'll see this again. This is something called the Vive Flow, which I'm particularly fond of. It's actually quite a very good quality headset. It's currently around about, I suppose, 400 pounds. So it's not cheap. But if you go onto eBay, you'll see with some of the tech that we use, you get some very, very good discounts, very good deals. But we got involved in heritage back in 1992 when I saw this particular demo in Monte Carlo, where this young lady was taking a priest based in Paris around a reconstruction of the Abbey de Cluny, which hasn't existed for centuries. And because the graphics then, the 3D was very, very primitive, but this communication thing in showing people and engaging with them in history was absolutely fantastic. And this is the project we did for the Salford City Council when I was based up there, in support of the Lowry Centre, which I'm sure as we know is where Media City and BBC Breakfast comes from. The idea behind this was taking people into an S. Lowry painting, in this case coming from the mill, and being able for them to be able to then see elements of Lowry's paintings as if they were put together to form what Lowry himself called a dreamscape, so a little three-dimensional world. We only had 12 days to do this, but again, the response we got, particularly from the public, was absolutely fantastic. And then back in '96, we were involved with Stonehenge. There've been more virtual reality Stonehenges than you can shake a stick at. But we did the first back in 1996. And the idea behind this was not so much just to do a VR model that looked the business, but really to educate people as to what Stonehenge was all about, where it was, how it got there, and what the surroundings actually looked like. So, for example, on one of the stones in Stonehenge, I don't know if you can make that out. That you probably can. If I just highlight that and go back, you can see that there is, in fact, the graffiti left on one of the stones by Christopher Wren. People don't see that. But with virtual reality, what you can do is you can then take the virtual stone, flag up an area of interest using this little symbol here, or this little sparkling light, and then you can bring up the fact Christopher Wren, the architect of St. Paul's Cathedral, left his graffiti there. And we presented that together with the late, great Patrick Moore at London Planetarium back in the summer solstice in 1996. So it was, again, it's just using virtual reality and augmented reality to make the invisible visible, bring these things alive, engage people of all ages, as you'll see, and inform them about things that normally they just get out of their car, do the tour, or get back in their car, and they miss 75% of what's actually there. In terms of Devon and Cornwall, particularly Devon, because I'm biased, he said, we've done an awful lot. And as I see, you can see from all these little dots around the patch, everything from the nuclear bunker at Bolt Head right up to Wheel Betsy, north of Tavistock, Haytor. We have one of our students actually did a drone radiation recording exercise over Haytor. Again, that's for another day. But you can see the kind of things that we sorry, I'm going backwards now. You can see the kind of areas that we work in. Obviously, quite a lot around the maritime area from Wembury up to the breakwater and around to Whitsand Bay. So again, I'm not going to go into all of these in detail. I've selected a few, and just to give you an idea of the range of technologies we use and really why we do it. So I think our first exercise in Devon, or certainly South Hams and South Plymouth came, and the Whitsand Bay area, came as a result of when the National Marine Aquarium sank the Scylla, or deliberately scuttled the Scylla to become what they called Europe's first artificial reef, which is not in fact the case. The first artificial reef was the SS Glenallen, Strathallan, sorry, which was sunk near the Great Newstone deliberately. But that's another story. So back in, I think it was 2004, 2014, it's a long time ago now, my dates are beginning to escape me. They scuttled the Scylla in Whitsand Bay, and it became an artificial reef. These things are great, but the problem is they put cameras on the Scylla for people to see what was going on. But of course, divers tend to collect these things, and so a lot of the cameras actually went walkies. So the idea behind this was for us to work with the aquarium, work with the Marine Biological Association on the Hoe, and put together a 3D model of, you see, Whitsand Bay, Rainhead just here, a little ship out roughly where the Scylla is, and to produce a 3D model of the Scylla that school kids could use an Xbox controller, dive down onto the Scylla, and actually explore it in real time. And here we are, for example, on the aft helicopter deck, and you can see all the different kind of growth and things like that. Now, the thing we did with this was we not just a 3D model, but we also developed a system using something called artificial life. You hear about artificial intelligence quite a lot these days, but this is artificial life. And the idea, as you can see, we were presenting this at the aquarium, was you could choose to be either a starfish, an urchin, or algae, And then what you could do is you would change the temperature of the seawater and see how that affected how the starfish feed on the algae, or how the starfish feed on the sea urchins who feed on the algae. And you could demonstrate using this virtual reality model how things would affect the ecosystems on board the ship if the temperatures of the seas actually increased. And we did this to a number of school kids and gave them a series of questionnaires afterwards. And again, the response was fantastic. And the information uptake was incredible. So they probably got more out of this than they would seeing a video of what was down there. And as a result of working with the National Marine Aquarium, there's a lovely lady down there called Debs Cracknell, who's still in contact with, and she's just done a PhD at Plymouth University on what's called restorative environments. What this means is if you put people into nature, and again, this has been very topical recently in the press, you put people into green environments, forestry, or blue environments by the coast, then they tend to recover better from, for example, operations. Their health and their mental well-being tends to improve. And there's a lot of research behind this, particularly some of the work that was done back in the 1970s and 1980s, where it was shown that if you have a view from your hospital bed of grass or greenery or bushes or trees, you recover faster and rates your stay in hospital as far superior to those who have just a brick wall and have no decent views whatsoever. And this is quite interesting because when you go to urban inner city hospitals like the Queen Elizabeth Hospital at Birmingham, if you're in intensive care, all you get to see is a clock. If you are in one of the wards, you get to see a lot of glass, a lot of steel, and a lot of brick. Not particularly restorative in any way, in shape and form. Same is true of Derriford. And these pictures were taken by my late mum in her final days at Derriford Hospital. And you've got all these rather greying pictures of the coast, and you've got this was just above her bed. And after a while, because it didn't change, and it was getting very, very faded, it drove her nuts. So again, for the sake of introducing virtual scenes of nature into hospital, we thought, well, maybe this has something. Maybe this has something where we could use it in hospital, care homes, places where people can't or do not want to get out into the real world. So what do we do? Again, being biased, I chose two places in Devon to go to. One was Rotary Reservoir, which I'll come on to in a minute, and one was Wembury. Why Wembury? Well, I mean, it is an area of outstanding natural beauty, but it was also somewhere that my mum and dad took me when I was a toddler. So you can see here, not much has changed in terms of waist size and hair coverage, but it was definitely one of the areas that we thought would be a great way of experimenting with putting the virtual reality together. And it's looking a bit old now, but one of my PhD students, we paid numerous pilgrimages to Wembury, and I got down there and built a 3D model using data from Ordnance Survey, taking photographs, doing sound recordings, a couple of drone flights as well. And we simulated a system where the time of day in the virtual Wembury was synchronized to the time of day in the real Wembury. So if I scroll on a bit faster, you can see that we've got the sun goes down, and then you probably can't do this now, you get into trouble. But you could launch a camp, you could start a campfire. You've got the lights of the church there. If you look slightly, you can just miss it, but you can see the lighthouse, the Edstone lighthouse in the distance. And you could have this on as long or as short as you would like. So the idea was, if we put this into a hospital, so for example, Queen Elizabeth Hospital, would it have an impact on the patient's sleep? If you were in a side ward, it did. If you were in the main intensive care ward, it didn't, because there's far too much else going on. So we then changed our attention to rehabilitation. And here you can see a couple of images. This is using a medical system called a MotorMed. This is a hand-controlled system, and this is a foot-controlled system. And what you probably can't make this out, but what these guys are doing is they are controlling a paraplegic tricycle, and they're going around part of the South Devon Path. And then every time they log in, they have to compete with their previous performance. So we're incentivizing them to improve their not just their eyes, but also their cardiac activity as well. And in this case, obviously improving their legs. We just about make out the cycle which responds to this guy pedaling with this lower limb MotorMed. The other thing we did was we used it in connection with a spirometer. I expect some of you have probably used these tubes where you have to take a deep breath and blow into these tubes to find out what your lung capacity is like. They have a similar thing called a plastic device called a spiroball, which is actually quite tedious. Where you have to, it's like these. Remember the old game where you had a net and a ball, and you had to blow into it to keep the ball hovering above the net. Very, very similar to that. And they wanted the patient hospital to indulge in that activity to improve their breathing, but it was so boring and uninspirational, they wouldn't use it. So we developed a system whereby you could take this digital spirometer, and then you could actually fire from the cliffs of Wembury. You can actually fire a medieval catapult, the rocks from medieval catapult going into the sea, and you actually take out quite a few little boats there, and that worked quite well. And in fact, even today, we're still doing work with, for example, Torbay Hospital and Heartlands Hospital in Birmingham, where they're still using that equipment, and we're desperately trying to find ways in which we can give the equipment, or give the software at least, to other hospitals around the UK. Now, I mentioned the link between healthcare and heritage, and this started at Wembury. We were down in Wembury, and we came just by coincidence, we came across this guy who was out walking his dog, and it so happened he turned out to be Wembury's local historian. And he said he wanted to know what we were doing, so we had a good old chinwag with him. He said, "Well, did you realise that in 1909 there was a proposal put forward to build what would be the largest commercial dock in the UK, rivaling Liverpool, rivaling Southampton, rivaling London even." And we found some documents and some illustrations which showed. So there's the Great Mewstone there. We'll just make that out in that picture, top left-hand corner. And there was these ideas of putting all these finger keys going out into the water. And some of the ships that they were going to take on board were absolutely huge. Thank goodness it was turned down. Otherwise, Southampton and Wembury would have been decimated forever. But to be able to use virtual reality and then to use augmented reality so you could actually show what this looked like on the real Wembury today. So it took the original photograph from the top of St. Werburgh's Church, and then the 3D model that we built, we could superimpose, so people could see the extent to which that part of the coast would have been absolutely decimated. And again, we put on a show of this for the Wembury villagers, and it went down very well. A lot of people had no idea that this was even going to be planned. And that's kind of been what we've been doing for the last. I mean, we've been coming down to the Plymouth area, I suppose, since 2004. So, a good 18 years of doing healthcare and heritage stuff. And it's amazing how the word of mouth and the stories come back to us. And this is one of my personal favorites. This is something, again, that people don't realize still exists. So this is the glaucus, which is developed by this young chap back in 1965 for £1,000. And these guys spent a week in this habitat, moored just off the Breakwater Fort in Plymouth. And in fact, it's still there. One of the biggest pieces of British maritime history left on the seabed just off the Breakwater, which is a great shame, because this did more for undersea technology than any of the French, any of the Jacques Cousteau, any of the American sea lab stuff. And it was all done for £1,000. They spent a week undersea, and they showed that you could actually survive by recycling the air and injecting bits of carbon and bits of oxygen as and when you needed to. So again, nobody knows. Well, very few people still know that it's down there. We did actually get into the Herald with this one, and they did dive on the remains of the habitat. But what we thought we would do is, well, if we can recreate the Breakwater, the fact that there was a Porpoise-class submarine moored just off when this is all put together, and for you to be able to swim underneath and down into the habitat itself. And here's that young man, Colin Irwin, now a professor at the University of Liverpool, and we actually managed to get him to swim virtually down to his invention and go inside, where you could experiment with all kinds of chemical equipment. So, for example, soda lime. You could use that to reduce the level of carbon dioxide. You could measure the carbon dioxide. You can turn the handle on oxygen bottles, and so on and so forth. So it's again an educational demo, but again making the invisible visible, showing people what exists, even though it's in such a bad state of repair even today. The A7 submarine, we've been collaborating for many years now with the Ships Project, Shipwrecks in Plymouth Sound, Peter Holt and his partner Mallory. And the idea here was to initially develop a very simple model of the A7 submarine just south of Rainhead, which went down just before the start of World War I, sadly with the loss of all 12 hands on board. It sank because the submarine became unstable during a torpedo run. So the idea was, let's provide them with a simple model of the submarine so they could then rehearse going down and focus on where it was they want to concentrate, given the limited amount of time that they had on the seabed. So we built from scratch a 3D model of the A7. This is showing the A7 in the old Wembley dock that never existed. And you can see things like the hawsers, the hawsers that the Royal Navy put down in vain to try and get this submarine up from the seabed back in December 1914, I think it was. But we were able to not just show it in this state, but also to be able to introduce turbid water, fish, and so on and so forth. And then what we did was we improved the quality of the model based on the photographs and the video that they brought back from the actual dives. And you can probably just make out there, one of the things that they did find were there were some humongous conger eels down there. There's one little conger eel there, just aft of the bridge, which is in this case covered in nets from fishing boats. But you can see him poking his snout out there, trying to discover what was going on. So again, making the invisible visible, but also helping divers to rehearse from a safety perspective how much time they can spend down the seabed. Now, I could go on for ages to do this, but again, not much time this evening. And obviously, you guys have got precious time as well. But we have done an awful lot of work in the submarine area in Plymouth. So, for example, Maria. Maria was a sloop, a converted sloop back in 1774, modified by a guy called John Day. And what he did was he took this vessel and he built this compartment, which you'll see in a second when the side comes off. He built this compartment and turned it into a submarine. So he was inside this compartment. You can see that he took in a hammock. He took in a variety of other things too, which again, you'll see in a second. A candle, some ship's biscuits, a bottle of water and a clock. And he dived this thing in Firestone Bay with the aim of spending 24 hours down there. Unfortunately, it was very flimsy design. And what happened was it imploded. And despite the very best efforts of a guy called Frank, a doctor called Frank, F-R-A-N-C-K, who actually believed that John Day was in a state of suspended animation, could therefore be recovered. Of course, it was never found. And it's still, there is belief that there may still be artifacts down there of some description, but no one's ever actually found it. Peter Holt from the Ships Project believes he knows where it is. We're challenging him to put his money where his mouth is. Surcouf was one of the biggest submarines of World War II. It's French origin. It was brought over to Devonport in 1940 by the Free French who were trying to escape the onslaught of the Nazis. And it was quite controversial, because it was moored in Devonport and kept under the very close eye of the Royal Navy, resulting in a firefight on board, which killed three of our blokes and one Frenchman. But then also on its way, I think it was on its way somewhere east of the Panama Canal in the Atlantic. It disappeared. It disappeared for an inexplicable reason. And again, to the best of my knowledge, nobody has actually found where it is. So we did this little recreation for a guy who was authoring a new book. And then briefly, these last two, again, working very closely with Devonport Dockyard, in this case with the guys at HMS Drake. We developed the first ever three-dimensional model of a T-class submarine based on HMS Trenchant, which is now sadly decommissioned. And the idea behind this was to train newcomers, new submarine ratings where safety critical equipment was on board and getting them familiar with the layers of the submarine before they went to sea. Given the fact that as submarines were being decommissioned, there were going to be less of them alongside for them to go and practice on the real thing. And we've also been working with the Devonport Naval Museum, the Heritage Museum, to recreate using a slightly different technique. This is using a 360 camera, which I'll come back to at the end, to simulate, to capture the individual compartments and the individual decks, but using real 360 photographs and merging those with a simple graphical model of the HMS Craig submarine. So you can jump from compartment to compartment, and then using your mouse, again, none of this is headset based, but using your mouse, you can then look around each individual compartment and see it in very, very good detail. Because to build this using computer graphics, as we did for the Subsave project, would cost an absolute fortune. And it would take ages to do. So merging this 360 camera technique with 3D is a very cost-effective way of doing it. So that's the submarine work that we do down in the West Country. Other maritime projects. This is the Amethyst from the Yangtze incident. Yangtze incident back in 1949, where the ship was attacked by the People's Liberation, the PLO of the Chinese Communist Party, and obviously it was in a film called The Yangtze Incident, featuring Richard Todd. It's amazing because when you go down to it's not the China House anymore. It's the Miller and something steakhouse in the Barbican. Just on the outside, there's a tiny little plaque which says Amethyst scrapped here, the Marylebone Slipway. And we thought, well, it's incredible to think that this ship, its final days back in 1957, was brought into Sutton Harbour, put onto Marylebone Slip, and then actually, as you can see here from this old picture, there's the restaurant next to it, and was scrapped. And again, there's nothing to commemorate it except a couple of words on this plaque. So we did those augmented realities. So we built the model of the Amethyst and then superimposed it as best we could on Sutton Harbour, and we showed this to a reunion of the surviving Amethyst crew back in 2012, including this guy here, who was played on the Yangtze incident film by the late great Sir Bernard Cribbins, and he played next to William Hartnell, who of course was the first Doctor Who. So it was marvelous to be able to see that this guy was still alive, and to associate him with Bernard Cribbins on the film. Mayflower. This is again Sutton Harbour related, but this is a project we finished back in a couple of years ago, and we managed to bring it into Plymouth and to demonstrate it to 50 Plymouthians. We had an email raffle, and these Plymouthians were able to come down to the Mayflower Museum on the Barbican, and we gave them headsets, each headset equipped with a brand new smell system. So you may have noticed dotted around this reconstruction, there are piles of both animal and human poo, because the 1620s, the Barbican would have been disgusting. It would have smelled awful, not just fish, but there'd be a lot of channels taking human excrement from the buildings out into Sutton Harbour. So the smell would have been horrendous. It was also populated by ladies of the night. Ladies of the night, they used lavender. They devised their own bottles of perfume, so they were able to smell that. Started off at Jacker Bakery. Jacker Bakery, of course, still exists, so we had to have the smell of baked bread. So there were a variety of smells, and this is the first time this smell system had ever been demonstrated in the world in a demonstration designed to take you back in time. But you can just about make out the Mayflower in the distance, in the mist. So this was simulating the day that the Mayflower departed, and we enabled you to walk around and see some of the old buildings, see some of the characters, and see some of the sights and sounds that probably you wouldn't associate with Sutton Harbour. But the great thing about this was a number of the people that we demonstrated this to. You can see the smell system there on this guy's headset. That little unit underneath the headset is actually producing up to a maximum of 9 smells that can be automatically dispensed to the nose of the wearer, depending on where you are in either on board the Mayflower or in the Barbican itself. But a lot of these people came out and they said, well, that's incredible. I will never walk along the streets of the Barbican again without using the same eyes. And that's how powerful virtual reality and things like smell and sound can be. It can completely change your view on the world, particularly if that world now exists. But we've taken people back in time to show them how it did exist and all the things that they wouldn't necessarily associate with the 17th century. We presented at the 1620s Plymouth Symposium in 2021, and we even had it on the big screen at last year's Harbour and Seafood Festival. And we had people coming from all parts of the Barbican to come and watch and even have a go. So again, getting the public involved. Right, that's maritime. Quickly on to Dartmoor and inland. Dartmoor is very precious to me because when I was doing my A-levels many decades ago, I used to go to Dartmoor just to chill out. It's just a fabulous place that will always be of particular importance to me. And since we've been flying drones on Dartmoor, with permission, I should stress, you can see Dartmoor in a completely different light. So this is flying. This is in between Princetown and Tavistock. This is Vixen Tor. This is a three-dimensional reconstruction of Fogging Tor Quarry that we constructed automatically from the video of a drone, just one flight of a drone doing a kind of scan pattern over the area, and we were able to recreate this three-dimensional model of Fogging Tor Quarry. And my favourite place of all time is the White Works and Foxtor Mire, just south of Princetown. So here we are flying over Foxtor Mire. It looks so less terrifying and dangerous from the air than it does on the ground. And when you fly in certain angles with sunlight, you can see the glint of all the little tiny rivers that go through it. You can see all the patches of some of the treacherous mire that's out there. But being able to, in fact, this Fogging Tor, you can see the lake in the middle of Fogging Tor, the stones, all the cottage remains, looking out to Plymouth Sound just in the top left-hand corner. So being able to see Dartmoor with different eyes is just an amazing experience. And we just love going up there. It's one of the most peaceful pastimes we do. But of the places we go to, the most valuable in terms of heritage and history, putting to one side all the Bronze Age habitations and what have you that exist dotted across Dartmoor, all the cysts and the crosses and goodness as well, is Burgh Tor. Burgh Tor, as influenced Steven Spielberg when he did Warhorse. I mean, he recognized the beauty of the place up there. This is one of the areas where I spent a lot of my time, I'd say, chilling out between A-levels. And that also started off, as I mentioned earlier, as a healthcare project. It didn't go any further than healthcare because we found that at the time, it was actually very difficult and very complicated to build all the different forests and the rhododendrons and all the other different things around Burgh Tor. So we decided not to use this as a healthcare demonstration after all. But again, we started speaking with people from Southwest Water, Southwest Lakes, local historians. And all of a sudden, things came out of the bushes, literally, that we had no idea were there. So not just the lodge, but things like the old Yelverton Reservoir, which people still don't realise is stuck behind the rhododendrons. Put to one side, Burgh Tor Reservoir. This is this swimming pool-like structure back from the road that comes down from the dam itself. The old bridge, suspension plates, the old railway station, Essery Farm, which I'll come on to in a second, the old suspension bridge bits that were from the bridge that was put up in the 1920s, and so on and so forth. So the hidden around Burgh Tor is an enormous amount of heritage that a lot of people miss. They drive up there, they'll get their 99 and flake from Mr. Whippy or Mr. Willie's or whatever it's called. They'll have a look at the water, they'll say, oh yeah, that's lovely, isn't it? They'll get back into their car and they'll go away again, having missed all this incredible history that's up there. So we had to build the railway station. That was a must. So here you see the Burgh Tor and Sheepstore halt. You can see the reservoir on the outside there, on the outside of the fence. We'll walk down there. RAF Harrowbeer in Yelverton was nearby, which flew a variety of aircraft, including Spitfires on occasions. So we had to put a Spitfire in, as you'll see one coming past now. And it was one of those places that I thought, well, what would it be like if you were on Dartmoor and you were late coming off your hike, and you got to the railway station and you missed your last train? So we've got this little demo down here where you are on the railway station, you have missed your last train. We've got the sound of the steam engine whistle going off in the distance just to rub it in, and an old Wickham trolley, and it is quite eerie when you put the headset on and you stand on the platform next to the seat there. It does, for some people, actually bring hairs the hairs up on your arm. And of course, Burrator being Burrator, having a dam, we had to do some augmented reality work too as well, where you have a Lancaster flying over the dam just for the sheer hell of it. But that's another story. Longstone Manor, the remains of which exist on the other side of the dam on Longstone Peninsula. Again, you can see an example here, flying a drone in a scan pattern over the remains, and then automatically generating a 3D model of the old house itself. From this, we can actually carry out measurements which enable us to build a 3D model of what Longstone Manor would look like, just prior to when they deliberately caved the roof in to avoid taxes when the reservoir was raised for the second time. So again, lots of these dotted around the reservoir. But one of the things that we wanted to find out was what's underneath. A lot of that you may have seen, for example, in the Herald, that they did it again this year, but because of the drought, it was going to expose this fantastic underwater village, you know, with a church spire that where the bell, during droughts, the bell will ring, and all these very spooky kind of things. Well, there's nothing like that down there. But we wanted to find out what was down there. We knew there was Sheepstore Bridge. We knew the road goes down from roughly where the Discovery Centre is, down past Wembley Walk across the bridge. Essery Farm has existed, and then the road that goes from the northern side of the reservoir right across past Sheepstore itself into Sheepstore Village, roughly in the location where the other dam, just before you get to Sheepstore, is located today. So in 2016, we teamed up with a Cornish-based company called Swathe Services, who've got this fantastic autonomous or robotic vessel. And you can see it here being deployed, and you can see the sonar. That's the sonar on the vessel itself. So that tilts down, and we're carrying out a sonar survey of Burrator covering this area. So from the main dam itself, which you can't get to now because the barrier that they put across there, to roughly just before the second dam, or the Sheepstore Dam there, and over to the Longstone Peninsula. So that's the area we covered. And we took the sonar data and we converted it into a very simple virtual reality model. And what we found, comparing it to an 1800s map, was fantastic. So this is our 3D model of the sonar data that came back from that robot vessel. Here's the 1880s map, and I think you can see instantly. There's S3 Farm. There are the foundations to S3 Farm. That little field or that little paddock there, you can still see that. You can still trace the road. You can still see Sheepstore Bridge, Drake's Lead. Oh, sorry, that's the Meavy. That's the River Meavy. Drake's Lead coming down here on the map, and coming up here with the remains of a small clapper bridge just down there. And here's all the quarrying scars that were caused as a result of building the dam. So the one-to-one comparison between the virtual reality and the map was just absolutely stunning. And since then, we've been adding little features to it. So we've been recreating the Essery Farm, the duck pond, which was evident from the 3D scan, Sheepstore Bridge, and even some of the remains of the track beds for the steam cranes that they used to move the granite blocks to create the dam, which you can just about see in the distance. But the most amazing thing from this was not so much what we knew was down there, was what we didn't know was down there, and what a lot of people didn't know that was down there. And that's these little blips. You can see these little blips. There's the dam. So these little blips are roughly at the area where you've got the two blocks of the old suspension bridge. And these blips appeared to be going all the way over the reservoir to the other side. Now, we were giving a presentation at Meavy, And afterwards, this lovely lady sent me some photographs, including this one from the 1940s. And lo and behold, you may just be able to make out there are two distinct lines of round objects in the water. So there's one side of where the suspension bridge was. The suspension bridge would have come over there, but this was actually in the water in the sometime in the 1940s. Go into the Dartmoor archive, and it becomes evident what they were. You can see them here. Do a close up. So these are what they call Type T anti-torpedo nets that were removed from the ships in Plymouth Sound, and for about £2,500 were replaced in Burritt Reservoir back in the 1940s. So you've got these chainmail nets, literally they are 17-inch diameter chainmail nets, and these spheres which we used to keep the things buoyant. We have no idea how, we think they may have been shot to make them sink after the war. And you've got the this big hawser coming out and attaching it to the blocks to which the suspension bridge was originally attached. Was there a risk of the dam being torpedoed? Possibly. This is a 1941 reconnaissance photograph by the Germans. So it actually says Stauwarte Stadt Plymouth. It's in the north, to the north of the town, between Yelverton, lying between Yelverton and Princetown. So again, you see the old railway line up here. You can see the dam itself. Aircraft did crash. There wasn't. You can see sheep store here, and this is a Ju-88, which came down in 1941 and crashed on the northern side of the reservoir. Did they? Were they carrying weapons? Yes, they were.
I'm just watching. I'm on Zoom.
And
can I ring you back in a minute?
This thing came down, and in fact, if you still go to this area, you can still pick, by digging into the ground, you can still find remains of this aircraft. So the guys who were on board this aircraft were temporarily interned at Sheepstore Church. But yes, there were aircraft, reconnaissance, and maybe even armed aircraft patrolling the area. So we decided to follow this up, and we were fortunate enough to have one of these little Trident remotely operated submersibles. So with permission of Southwest Water and Southwest Lakes, we sent this down, and the first time we took it down, we found them. So here you can just about make out one of those spheres. Again, remember this is 4-foot diameter, with the attachment bolt or the attachment coupling or whatever you want to call it on the top. And then after a little while later, we were able to go even further, and we discovered the actual chainmail nets themselves. So this is quite close. This is the first or the most recent drought, which is 2019, I think it was. But one of the things we wanted to do was to find out whether or not these nets, as depicted in that photograph, still went across the entire width of the reservoir. So we very recently went down again. Let's just make sure I stop this, because if I stop now, we managed to find that they certainly go a lot deeper than we thought. So we believe they do still go quite a way over there. But we were able to film, and this is something that Southwest Water and Southwest Lakes are really quite annoyed about. You see this little guy here. This is an American crayfish. This is an invasive species that has been released into Burritt Reservoir that they're desperately trying to get rid of. But we managed to capture one on the chainmail nets themselves, and we got, because it was the water was much clearer, we got some much better imagery, including a little bit later on, which I've gone through as fast as I can, again of another one of the spheres, and we were able to actually navigate around this sphere and find out the rest of the nets. So again, people have got no idea, or many people still don't realise that these things are down there and why they were put there. This is a story that I remember with Darren when I gave this story in much more detail before. This is a story that involved meetings with Barnes Wallace, the bouncing bomb, the invention of the bouncing bomb. This is stuff we've got the documents, declassified documents that were top secret, talking about moving the torpedo nets from Plymouth Sound into Burritt. And there's an incredible story behind this. And just to finish off, just to let you know some of the other projects that we're doing both down there and up here. We've recently just finished 3D scanning the Labier Tunnel, which is the Shaw Tunnel, just north of the old Great Western Railway halt at Shaw Bridge. That was quite an experience. It's about a mile long, this tunnel, and of course it curves. So when you go, you see it curves. So when you get to the middle, roughly, you can't see either end. But because it's a cycle path now, of course, it's well lit. But I remember doing sponsored walks for the handicapped years and years and years ago. It was really spooky walking through that tunnel, and then 2/3 of the way through, you've got the entry into the Bickley Vale copper mine, the Phoenix copper mine, which itself goes into the side of the tunnel and goes further back in. That's somewhere, and you can tell, obviously you can tell it's a copper mine, but that's somewhere I would love to explore in the not too distant future. But this is what we use for 3D scanning. It's like the drone, getting the 3D models from the drone. We can do it much faster and much cheaper than we can if we try to build this using 3D. So this is something called the Matterport. It's about a £3,000 piece of equipment, but it does something like 6 or 7 rotational steps, and that has a laser scan as you go through, and it produces quite an impressive 3D model. So you can actually walk through the entire tunnel, and you can see here there's 177 scanning points, so 177 moves of this tripod, about 3 feet every time, to get through this tunnel to build it in complete detail. We were given permission by the guys at Kitley Caves and Yelmton, the Bastard family, Spike Bastard and his dad, Mike Bastard, would you believe? Wonderful guys. I don't know if any of you ever went to Kitley Caves. I certainly did when I was at school in Plymouth. It's been closed to Plymouth. It's been closed now, I think, for good 22 years, I would have thought. But they let us go in. We had to cancel the first trip because we came across a group of hibernating horseshoe bats. So rather than disturb them, which is not really allowed, we abandoned and we went back in April of the following year. But we used exactly the same. Scanning technique, and we also took our little remotely operated submersible and tried to get from here, just inside the caves, through to the River Yelm, because this tunnel connects the caves with the River Yelm. We couldn't get much further because there's a lot of silt there. But what we're hoping to do in the very near future, probably in November, is go back down. And this all sounds very geeky. This is called Pimple Rock, which is just north of the caves on the River Yelm. Somewhere around there is the entrance into the caves, but from the Yelm side. So we're going to use that submersible to try and find those and see if we can get in that way. Mount Edgecombe Park Garden Battery, we've done some 3D scanning and augmented reality work there. You can see on my tablet, you can see I'm standing next to the inside of the garden battery, which you can see when you come over on the Cranwell Ferry. You can see the garden battery. It's just along from the little cafe and restaurant of Mount Edgecombe Park, or Garden Park. It's a gorgeous place. I haven't been there for years. And we took this 3-dimensional model that a Canadian friend of mine built of a 19-inch cannon, and we were able to put it using augmented reality techniques into the 3-dimensional scans of the fort itself. So you get an idea of the kind of armaments that were put in place in order to protect certainly the South Yard or King William Yard from any vessels coming up past Drake's Island into the Hamos to attack the Navy at the time. But being able to use augmented reality, you can see when you're doing this how big these cannons actually were. We also took our 3-dimensional model of the Mayflower at the time, and I can't remember. I think it was HMS Kent. HMS Kent was coming in to Devonport, so we couldn't resist putting our Mayflower into the Hamos and trying to scale it so you could see the size of the Mayflower next to HMS Kent. And we've got some video of this, and which I can show it another time. And it's just a little bit of fun to use that technique to show the old and the new. Thanks to Darren's efforts and us being persistent with English Heritage, next month, early November, we're going to be 3D scanning Tintagel. Some of you may have seen Tintagel as one of 5 areas of concern in the UK on the part of English Heritage because of coastal erosion. and that was on the BBC News not that long ago, a few days ago. So we're going to take our scanner down there and start to build up a 3D model, and maybe do it regularly to see if there really is an erosion problem. We're doing exactly the same in the near future with Pengelly Caves, again for another time, but we helped Pengelly Caves out a few years ago when they had their fossils stolen by black marketeers. So we were able to get three-dimensional models, all three-dimensional scan data of the fossils that were stolen from the Natural History Museum, recreate them in virtual reality, put them into a virtual cave, but also use this to 3D print some replica fossils that they're now using in place at Pengelly Caves up in Buckfast-Lee. And I'm sworn to secrecy at the moment, but you may know where this is. But we're hoping in October to negotiate access to another high-profile cave in the vicinity of Plymouth, which I'm particularly excited about. Up here, we've got just literally five minutes from where I live now. It's an old farmhouse, which is in a really bad state. It's got some heritage lottery funding. It's going to be renovated and changed into flats. But we're working with the Worcestershire heritage people to recreate what it looked like, not just back in the early 1900s, which is what this is showing, or late 1800s, but also going back possibly to the 15th century. This has got links apparently with Catherine of Aragon. So again, and in involving ourselves with local schools, we hope to build this up. And the other project that again we're quite excited about is working with Severn Valley Railway and looking at how we can use the 360 filming technique and virtual reality, just as we did with the HMS Courageous submarine, but to give experiences to individuals, residents in local care homes who are suffering from early onset dementia. In Kidderminster, which is just north of where I live in Droitwich, there are residents who are ex-railway workers. So we're hoping to be able to take this to them again, second week of November, all being well. And what we've done is we've got three techniques of showing them information. Here you can see, ignore my colleague Faye, here you can see a GoPro camera stuck on the side of the Great Western Railway carriage. There's another one on the other side. And we filmed the journey from Kidderminster to Bewdley. And then my son and a colleague actually built a three-dimensional model of this Great Western Railway carriage. We also were given the opportunity to put the 360 camera onto the front of a steam engine and into the carriage itself. So this is the camera we're using. I mentioned it's about £1,200, does 360. And again, saves us an awful lot of time and money. We mounted that at head height inside the carriage, and we also got the chance 2 or 3 weeks ago to put it on the front of a Deltic engine, which is visiting. So you can see this little camera on a magnetic base stuck on the front of this huge engine, and it's quite amazing the effects you can get. So with the three-dimensional carriage reconstruction, you put on the headset. So you've got like this Vive Flow headset, or any of a number of headsets actually. There's another headset you can get on eBay at the moment for about £180. And we used the video that we took from the side of the train as a kind of screen outside of the three-dimensional compartment. So you're inside, so you could change this compartment into anything and use exactly the same video. And we capture the sound as well, obviously. And this is my favorite, and this is one of my grandson's favorites. So this is the video from the front of the locomotive. This is absolutely weird, but it's awesome. It's like you're sat on the front of a steam engine. When you look down, you can see the buffers, and you can literally see the track as if it was between your legs. So again, we're given permission by Severn Valley Railway. And this is now coming out of Bridge North Station on its way to Kidderminster. And you can either have this on a headset or you can have this on an ordinary screen, and you can look left and you can look right using a mouse. You don't have to have a headset to be able to appreciate this. And again, it's picking all the sound up. At one point, it goes into a tunnel. You can see the sparks, literally almost like Back to the Future. Above your head, the sparks coming out of the chimney stack. But it is quite a weird experience. So we're going to be taking all these, and hopefully we're going to be putting them into the care home in the coming future. And again, it's all about engaging with the public. It's all about engaging with school kids. It's all about informing individuals what's out there, things they've never experienced, things they can't experience because of health conditions, and things that they just didn't realise were there for the taking. And I think that's where we get most of our. We don't get funded for a lot of this. I have to say, a lot of this is a labour of love. But we've shown this at so many places in Devon, from the museum at Dartmoor to mainstream and special needs schools all the way around Plymouth. Saltash, we even produced some virtual reality badges for the brownies and guides at Saltash, and that went down incredibly well. But the response we get from these kids, and not just kids, but older kids as well, you know, people of 90, 94, they've used this technology with no fear whatsoever. The response we get is absolutely fantastic. And I say, we don't get paid for doing a lot of these projects, but the way I bribe my team, as Darren knows, is that I bring them down, I bribe them with pasties. So, you know, we will work for pasties is the slogan on the side of our Western National bus parked up at Borough Reservoir. Thank you for taking part in this. Thank you for giving up your time to come and listen to all this. I hope it's been informative. Quite happy to take questions if you want, but hopefully you may have opened your eyes to things that you didn't know were probably not that far from where you live, apart from our international visitors, of course. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for that, Bob. That was fascinating as always. Are there any questions from anyone? I've got one in particular I'd just like to ask. I know we were chatting before we started Stephen's talk, but is there anywhere in particular that you've not done yet, or you didn't mention you've got planned to do, where you'd like to take this equipment to actually survey?
So what was it? I missed the first part of that question.
Is there anywhere? I know we were chatting about some of the things earlier on before the meeting started, and you touched on a few of the future plans you've got, to places you're going to be going to, like Tintagel, etc. But is there anywhere you've not mentioned that in your dreams you'd really love to take your equipment to survey?
There's tons. I mean, every so often I get the feeds from Plymouth Live about caves that exist under Plymouth Hoe, and you know, are there caves under the are there tunnels under the Barbican? We've done one of the main tunnels on Drake's Island, tin mine, an actual tin mine going out into, you know, one of the tin mine remains that go out under the water in Cornwall. I'd love to do that. I'd love to be able to do the Aerospace Museum at Newquay, because I understand that's closing down in the new year, which is a real shame. And they've got some absolute corkers of aircraft exhibits there. We did a TSR-2 aircraft at the Cosford Museum. And could you do a survey from Devil's Point to Mount Edgecombe? Yeah. That would involve presumably going on the Kreml ferry as well, would it? 100 foot deep. The ROVs we've got will go. Sorry, Dan. To answer your question,
no,
yes, we're always open for suggestions. We're a kind of group. We find it very difficult to say no. And in fact, when somebody comes up with an idea, we tend to pester them until they say yes. 100 foot deep, yes. The umbilical for the little trident, we've got a second ROV, which I didn't have time to talk about, but they're both capable of going down to there. My only concern is that we would probably have to get very special permission from the Navy. So I think they probably wouldn't take very kindly to us if we've got a small mini submersible down there swimming around when one of their ships, or worse still, one of their boats, the submarines, come down the Hammers. But yeah, there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't. Oh, you can? Oh, right. That's from Peter. Peter, you're on. Have you got access to a boat? Because I think whilst we've got a 100 foot umbilical, possibly more, Oh, great. Yeah, my Navy contacts have moved on. But whilst we've got a 100-foot umbilical, that's 100-foot diagonally doesn't give us 100-foot depth. So to be able to maybe just take a boat out and put it straight down, that might be. And one of the things we're really keen to do is, and we tried this at Rotary, is to put this into a waterproof sphere, which again is I think it's 100 meters. It's depth rated down there, but to go take that down and do 360s, we'd have to mess around with buoyancy on the submersible, because I think we have to weight it down and make it slightly negatively buoyant. But to be able to take that down as well, do some 360 down there, assuming that it's not too murky, that would be awesome. That would be awesome.
Fantastic.
I bet there's some really interesting stuff down there too that's been dropped by.
That's true.
By you know who.
I would not to say. I think my father is probably responsible for some of it. Are there any other questions looking around? Seeing none, I'd just like to say, Bob, a massive great thank you again for sparing the time this evening to talk to us. The recording of this I'll make available in the next day or two, but thank you ever so much again for speaking to us, and hopefully some point in the future we can invite you back to hear more about some of your future projects as well. I'd love to see what happens with Tintagel once you've been down there. So thank you ever so much.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed they don't change their mind, because we're all hyped up about it now. And given the coastal erosion thing, it makes complete sense.
Definitely.
And when you get a chance, can you the international people here? It's like the Bahamas. I can't even pronounce.
We've got Bahamas and we've got Greece. We did have someone from Brazil with us earlier on as well. I think she's dropped off now, but
that's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. I wouldn't mind just getting a list of people where people came from, because that's amazing. So yeah, and a great pleasure, Dan.
Great stuff. Right, well, the time is coming on. It's just gone 8 o'clock, so I think we'll call it quits for this evening, guys. So thank you all ever so much for coming tonight. I'm sure you've all thoroughly enjoyed this evening's talk. Those of you who are members of our club, I'll see you next week, and our visitors hopefully see you again soon. So thank you all ever so much, and see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.